Let me take a selfie.
What can I say that literally hasn't already been said about the Emoji Movie? Ever since this movie came out and ever since it was announced, it has been treated to nothing but backlash and scorn, and so many people have been asking me to review it. For the longest time, I didn't want to review this movie because I feel like I couldn't add anything new to the table. But because I had to stick with the tradition of reviewing every animated movie in the previous year, I had to talk about this movie. And here's the question: is it really the worst animated movie of all time? Or even one of the worst movies ever made? Let's find out. The emojis live inside a boy's phone, where their job is to get scanned and basically be put on the boy's phone during text messages. And one meh emoji named Gene is super excited to start his first day of work, but a lot of people don't trust him because he's actually got several different emotions, not just the one emotion that he has. But during his first day of the job, Gene screws up and now the user thinks the phone has a virus on it. Knowing that now everybody is in danger, Gene sets off on an adventure to become a true meh emoji. The constant argument that this movie gets is that it's a rip-off of Wreck-It Ralph and Inside Out, and for the most part, they're right. There are a lot of things that this movie copies from, not just those two movies, but it also copies from a few other movies as well, most notably, in this case, the Lego Movie and Smurfs: The Lost Village. The similarities to Wreck-It Ralph is that the emojis keep traveling to all these different apps on the phone and interacting with what they are. Yeah, it's kind of like Wreck-It Ralph, but the problem with here is not only are these apps completely unoriginal and they're just taken off apps that actually exist, they only exist in the movie just to sell product placement, and that's all this movie exists for. Just to sell as one big product placement so you can buy smartphones and download these apps and use emojis. This movie just feels like one giant ad. It doesn't do anything new, it doesn't do anything original, it's just a very unoriginal movie with nothing new being added to it at all. As a result, this movie just feels like an insult, because they're constantly shoving in the fact that these characters are using cell phones and that they want you to use them, and they act like emojis are the greatest communication tool in the world. Like, are they being serious? If it was a joke, maybe I would respect it, but no, they act like emojis are the greatest communication tool in the world, even though it's not. Like what, phones and actually talking to people is not good enough? No, emojis are what you have to use, because they're so important. Not. Because of that, there's no real passion behind this movie. It all just acts like an advertisement, instead of trying to make something that could actually be considered fun and enjoyable by the audience. Most people were just bored watching this movie, and a lot of people weren't really invested in actually buying this phone and all these apps. What also doesn't work with this movie is that it uses something that a lot of people don't really like, which is emojis. Oh sure, there are a lot of people who use emojis, including myself, but in that sense, I'm trying to make text icons, not actually use the emojis, but then just automatically transfers into one. No, what I mean by that is that with something like the Lego Movie, it was able to work because even though a lot of people thought from the initial trailer that it was going to be some kind of corporate monster, it was actually a really good movie because it took advantage of the Legos and it actually made it into a very enjoyable movie. It used the Legos to an advantage and made a really unique story behind it. But with the Emoji Movie, there's nothing unique about it. The story doesn't try something different, it's just the same dumb story about being yourself that we've seen a million times before. This isn't really a movie, it feels more like a giant ad, and a giant middle finger to the audience. Okay, well aside from the intention, how's everything else? Well, if we have to talk about the comedy, it is terrible. There is not a single joke in this movie that I thought was funny. Well, okay, I guess I'll be honest, there was this scene which I thought was kind of amusing.
Sorry, emoticons! I hate knocking over the elderly here. Let me help.
Oh, my colon!
But aside from that, every joke in this movie falls flat on its face. The main joke that they use throughout the entire movie is that these emojis are sticking to their one emotion and they can't do anything else. And the king of these terrible jokes is the poop emoji, who's played by Patrick Stewart. These jokes are the worst jokes in the entire movie because they're not funny and they're just poop jokes. That's about it. They're just the worst jokes in the movie. movie. Also, the world of emojis doesn't even make any sense. They're trying to show these different technologies and that all these emojis that do different things, but they don't even explain everything. The movie constantly acts like you have to use your one emoji in order to do your job. But what if there's other emojis that aren't faces that want to do something else? Like, what if there's an elephant that want to be a giraffe? Can they at least explain some of this stuff to the audience? Otherwise, they're just going to be confused. Also, this movie copies stuff from Inside Out, where it's constantly cutting back to the real world with the human protagonist Alex, who has a crush on this girl, but the problem is that this character isn't fleshed out. With Inside Out, Riley's a really well fleshed out character, and you can understand her struggles. This guy doesn't even take up a good chunk of the movie. He gets like less than 20 minutes of screen time, and not even that many lines. The movie is constantly focusing on the emojis, so in that sense, it gives us little to no reason to want to sympathize with the human protagonist. And speaking of Alex, let's also talk about the other characters, because almost every character in this movie is an asshole. Seriously, at the beginning of the movie, all the other emojis are constantly being dicks to Gene just because he's different. In fact, it's so mean-spirited that even his parents are neglectful of the fact that he has more than one emotion. It almost reminds me of Chicken Little, which isn't a good thing. But at least with Chicken Little, it wasn't so pandering and annoying, and at least there weren't that many moments that were that mean-spirited. With this movie, it constantly has the characters arguing with each other and snapping at each other. It doesn't give me any reason to like these characters. Almost all the characters in this movie are so stupid. Aside from our human protagonist, who I could barely give a shit about, the other emojis aren't that great either. High Five is the comic relief, but he does things that are more selfish, and nothing he does in this movie is funny. In fact, his subplot is completely forgotten about. And as for Jailbreak, well, I honestly don't understand her character in this movie. She's constantly acting like she's not a girl and that she can do stuff that no girls do. And then towards the end of the movie, she just retains back to her original self and does what she was completely against before, which doesn't make any of her scenes before feel justified or even add up to anything. And then there's Gene's parents, who very well might be the worst characters in the whole movie, because they have this whole subplot where they're looking for Gene, and at one point they break up while they're looking for their son. Are you kidding me? And then a few scenes later, they just get back together. So what's the point of this subplot? You could just have them show up in the end and that'd be fine. But no, we gotta make the runtime and make all the characters stand out, because we gotta make all of them so damn memorable. I don't want to remember any of these characters because they're either bland or just freaking assholes. Oh, there's so much I hate about this movie, but you're probably wondering, is there anything I like about this movie? Well, aside from that one text emoticon joke, which I thought was funny, I guess there's a few things I like. For one thing, the animation is alright. I wouldn't say the animation is amazing, because they're literally just taking these emojis and putting stick figure arms and legs on them, but the animation does at least look better than movies like Norm of the North or Rock Dog. The voice acting in this movie is alright. I particularly like Stephen Wright's voice as Gene's dad. Again, the character himself is stupid, but the voice they got to portray him was actually a really good choice. But unsurprisingly, those are the only positives that I have with this movie. I think it would be fair to say that I do think the Emoji Movie is the worst animated film that I have ever seen. Worse than Norm of the North, worse than Minions, worse than The Wild. It is that awful. The movie just feels like an advertisement. That's all it exists for. Just to sell these products and that they want you to buy them because Sony is so desperate to make money. The story is boring. There's nothing that really makes that sense, and they barely explain these things to you. The characters are so hateable and so unlikable, and the comedy is just abysmal. I just hope that at some point in the future, people can just forget that this movie ever existed.